There's a form of intelligence that no IQ test measures, no school teaches it, no university grants a degree in it, because you can't learn it from a textbook. You can only learn it from surviving something that tried to break you. It's called traumatic intelligence. And if you have it, you've been walking through the world reading people, predicting danger, decoding subtext, and mapping social dynamics at a speed that makes most people uncomfortable. They call you intense. They call you too perceptive. They call you hard to fool. What they don't call you is what you actually are. Intelligent in a way that was forged in fire. Today I'm giving you 11 signs that you carry this rare intelligence. Pay attention to sign 7, because that's the one that separates traumatic intelligence from every other form of perception, and it's the one you've never been able to explain to anyone. Let's start with the sign you've been living with since before you had a name for it. Sign 1. You read rooms in seconds, not minutes. You walk through a door, and your brain completes a full environmental scan before you've taken your second step. Who's tense? Who's faking? Who's angry but hiding it? Who's the safest person in the room? Where the exits are? What the energy is? Whether this environment is stable or about to shift. All of it processed in a window so narrow that by the time you've said hello, you already know more about the room than most people will discover in an hour. You don't do this consciously. You don't choose to scan. Your nervous system does it for you. Automatically, involuntarily, the way your lungs breathe without being told. The scan runs because at some point in your history, walking into a room without scanning meant walking into danger without preparation. Research in threat perception shows that individuals who experienced unpredictable environments in childhood develop significantly faster environmental processing than those raised in stable settings. Your brain isn't scanning because it's anxious. It's scanning because it was trained to detect instability before instability becomes danger. And the training was so effective that the skill now operates as a permanent background process. Most people enter rooms and see the room. You enter rooms and see the data the room is generating. Facial tensions, breathing patterns, postural shifts, vocal tones, proximity choices, power dynamics, all of it flowing into a processing system that most people's brains never needed to develop. People think you're perceptive. You're not perceptive. You're surviving. Your brain just made survival look like a superpower. Sign 2. You detect micro shifts in people's energy before they speak. Someone's mood changes and you feel it before they express it, sometimes before they're even conscious of it themselves. You're sitting with a friend and mid-conversation something shifts. Their tone didn't change, their words didn't change, but something underneath the surface moved. A frequency change so subtle it wouldn't register on any instrument except the one your nervous system became. 3 minutes later, they say, "Actually, something's been bothering me." And you're not surprised, not because you're psychic, because your brain detected the emotional shift the way a seismograph detects tremors that humans can't feel. The shift was real. It was measurable, at least by your internal instruments. And your detection preceded their disclosure by minutes. This isn't empathy in the traditional sense. Empathy is feeling what someone else feels. What you do is closer to emotional sonar. You emit presence and read what bounces back. And the returning signal carries information about the other person's internal state that their words haven't expressed yet. This skill was built in an environment where someone's emotional state could change without warning, and the change carried consequences. A parent whose mood shifted from calm to volatile. A caregiver whose energy predicted what kind of night you were about to have. A household where the emotional weather could change in seconds, and the only people who survived comfortably were the ones who could feel the change before the storm hit. Now you feel every storm, in every person, in every room, whether you want to or not. Your emotional sonar runs continuously, scanning, reading, processing, reporting, and the reports are almost always accurate, which is both a gift and a burden, because feeling everyone's emotional weather means you're never just in your own climate, you're carrying theirs too. Sign 3. You see through performed emotions. Instantly someone is smiling. Everyone sees a smile, you see a performance. Not because you're cynical, because your brain processes the smile through a verification system that most people don't have, a system that cross-references the smile against 17 other data points. Are the eyes involved? Does the timing match the context? Is the facial muscle engagement symmetrical? Does the smile match their baseline, or is it a departure? Is the energy behind the smile consistent with the energy in their body? The entire verification takes less than a second. And if the smile fails the check, your brain flags it, not with a thought, with a feeling, something in your gut that says, this isn't real, even though the smile looks perfect to everyone else in the room. Psychologists call this thin slice accuracy, the ability to make accurate judgments about people's genuine emotional states from brief observations. Research shows this ability is significantly enhanced in people who grew up needing to distinguish between authentic and performed emotions in caregivers. When the difference between a genuine smile and a dangerous smile determines a child's safety, the child's brain develops a detection system of extraordinary precision. You can spot performed confidence, performed interest, performed kindness, performed calm, performed enthusiasm. Your brain has a library of authentic emotional expressions that it built through years of critical observation, and every performed emotion gets compared against that library in real time. This is why you often distrust people that everyone else loves, not because you're contrarian, because you're seeing a layer of the performance that's invisible to people whose survival never depended on detecting it. The charming person that everyone adores sets off your system because the charm is slightly too calibrated. The confidence that everyone admires makes your stomach tighten because the confidence is a degree too consistent to be organic. You can't always explain what you're seeing, which makes it frustrating because I just don't trust them isn't a socially acceptable assessment when everyone else is enchanted. So you stay quiet, you watch, and you wait for the mask to slip, which it always does, because performed emotions, no matter how polished, eventually break under the weight of the truth they're concealing. Sign 4. You process silence as information, not absence. Most people experience silence as empty. You experience silence as loud. When someone stops talking, you don't hear nothing. You hear the reason they stopped. You hear the thought they almost said but caught. You hear the emotional shift that made them choose silence over disclosure. You hear the calculus they're running about whether it's safe to continue. This is because you grew up in an environment where silence was never neutral. Silence meant someone was deciding, planning, withdrawing, loading. Silence was the precursor to events that required preparation. And your brain, having learned that silence contains more information than speech, never unlearned the skill. Now you read silences the way most people read sentences. A pause after a question isn't just a pause, it's a response. The length of the pause, the breath pattern during the pause, the shift in body language during the pause, all data, all processed, all contributing to an assessment that operates entirely below the conscious awareness of the person being read. This is why conversations with you feel different, and people can't always explain why. They feel seen, not through your questions, through your silence. Because your silence isn't passive, it's receptive in a way that invites disclosure. People say things to you they didn't plan to say, not because you asked, because your silence created a space that felt safe enough for the truth to emerge. This is also why manipulators find you unsettling. Because manipulative silence, the kind designed to pressure you into speaking first, doesn't work on you. You read their strategic silence as information, you process it, you analyze its intent, and you respond to the intent rather than the pressure, which means their weapon just became your data. You don't just tolerate silence, you fluently speak it. And in a world obsessed with words, speaking silence is the rarest linguistic skill a human can possess. Sign 5. You predict relational outcomes with uncomfortable accuracy. A friend starts dating someone new. You meet the person once, maybe twice, and within those interactions you've already mapped the trajectory, the idealization phase that's currently happening, the control patterns that will emerge in month 3, the isolation tactics that will start around month 6, the collapse that's coming in year 1. You don't say anything, because you've learned that predictions, however accurate, are unwelcome, especially when they're negative, especially when they concern someone's new relationship, especially when the person delivering them is you, someone whose perceptiveness has already been labeled as overthinking or being negative. So you stay quiet. You watch the movie play out, the same movie you've seen before, in different settings with different actors, following the same script. And when the collapse arrives, on schedule, with the exact dynamics you predicted, nobody asks how you knew. They just ask for your support. This predictive ability isn't intelligence in the academic sense, it's pattern library access. Your brain has stored thousands of behavioral sequences from childhood environments where predicting what was coming next was essential for safety. Those stored sequences now function as templates. When you observe someone's behavior, your brain automatically cross-references it against the library, and when a match is found, the predicted outcome arrives not as a thought, but as a certainty. You don't think the relationship will fail. You know it will. The way you know the ending of a movie you've already seen. Not because you're pessimistic, because you've watched this specific behavioral pattern resolve the same way enough times that the uncertainty has been eliminated. The burden of this accuracy is isolation, because walking through life seeing outcomes that nobody else can see and not being able to share those insights without being dismissed creates a specific kind of loneliness that no amount of social connection can address. You're present in everyone's movie, and you already know how all of them end. Before we get to the remaining signs, the ones that get into the territory most people have never heard described out loud, I want to know, which of these first 5 have you been carrying silently? The room scanning, the energy detection, the performance spotting, the silence reading, or the relational prediction? Drop your number in the comments, 1 through 5, and if someone has ever called you too much for perceiving what they couldn't, remember this. They're not wrong that you're too much, but too much isn't a flaw, it's a capacity, one that was installed at a cost nobody should have to pay. Now let me show you the signs that go even deeper. Sign 6. You understand motivations people haven't admitted to themselves. Someone does something, makes a decision, takes an action, expresses a preference, and while everyone around you accepts the stated reason, your brain immediately generates the actual reason, the one they didn't say. The one they might not even know. Your friend says she turned down the promotion because she doesn't want the stress. Your brain says she turned it down because she's terrified of outperforming her father, whose career stalled at exactly the same level, and exceeding him feels like a betrayal of a loyalty she can't name. Your colleague says he's staying in the relationship because things are getting better. Your brain says he's staying because he's terrified of being alone, and the relationship, however dysfunctional, is less frightening than the empty apartment that would force him to sit with himself. You don't arrive at these readings through extended analysis. They appear instantly, like translations. Someone performs the surface behavior, and your brain simultaneously produces the subtitle, the unspoken motivation, the hidden driver, the real reason underneath the stated reason. This ability was developed because you grew up needing to understand the motivations of people whose stated reasons were unreliable. A parent who said, "I'm doing this for your own good," while doing it for their own emotional regulation. A caregiver who said, "I'm not angry," while being consumed by anger they couldn't acknowledge. An environment where the stated reason and the actual reason were consistently, sometimes dangerously, different. Your brain learned to stop accepting the subtitle provided and start generating its own. And the accuracy of your subtitles, refined through years of critical pattern recognition, is often disturbing. Not to you, to the people you read, because being understood at a level you haven't even understood yourself is one of the most disorienting experiences a human being can have. Some people find it comforting, the right people, the ones who want to be known, but many find it threatening. Because your perception exposes the gap between their performance and their reality, and that gap is usually something they've invested enormous energy in keeping hidden, from others, and from themselves. Sign 7. You know when someone is about to leave before they do this, is the one I told you to pay attention to. Because this sign is where traumatic intelligence becomes something that no other form of intelligence can replicate. You feel the withdrawal before it manifests, in a friendship, in a relationship, in a workplace dynamic. Weeks, sometimes months before the person actually begins pulling away, your system registers the departure. It's not one thing, it's dozens of microscopic things. A reply that's half a second slower than their baseline, a laugh that's a fraction less genuine, a physical proximity that's shifted by inches, a question about your day that used to carry warmth and now carries protocol. Each change is invisible in isolation. Together, they form a pattern your brain recognizes immediately. This person is leaving. You learned this skill because someone important left without warning once, or maybe not once, maybe repeatedly, and your nervous system decided that the pain of unexpected departure was unsurvivable. So it built a detection system calibrated to catch the earliest possible signals of withdrawal, so early that the person withdrawing usually hasn't consciously decided to withdraw yet. You're detecting the pre-decision, the shift in emotional investment that precedes the conscious choice to disengage. You're reading the weather pattern before the storm has formed, and by the time the storm arrives, you've already processed the grief, built the contingency, and emotionally prepared for an exit that the other person hasn't even committed to yet. This is why people think you handle endings well. You don't handle them well. You handle them early. The mourning happened in advance, silently, while the relationship was still technically intact. By the time the actual departure occurs, you've been grieving for weeks. The ending isn't a shock. It's a confirmation of data you've been collecting since the first signal appeared. The burden of this sign is that it robs you of naive trust. You can't just be in a relationship without monitoring for the departure signal. You can't just enjoy a friendship without your system running background scans for withdrawal indicators. You can't just be present because your brain is partially living in the predicted future. Specifically the future where they leave. This isn't paranoia. Paranoia sees threats that don't exist. You see threats that do exist but haven't manifested yet. The distinction matters, because one is a disorder and the other is intelligence. Intelligence that came at a price, but intelligence nonetheless. Sign 8. You absorb emotional atmospheres without choosing to. You walk into a house where an argument just happened, and your body knows before anyone speaks. Your chest tightens, your breathing changes, your mood shifts to match an emotional residue that isn't yours but is now inside you. This isn't standard empathy. Standard empathy requires a visible emotional cue. A person crying, a voice raised in anger, a facial expression communicating distress. You can read emotional residue from the environment itself. The tension left behind in a room after conflict, the heaviness that lingers in a space where grief has occurred, the subtle wrongness of an atmosphere that's been contaminated by dishonesty. Neuroscience calls this emotional contagion. But for you, it operates at a level that most research on emotional contagion doesn't cover. You don't just catch emotions from people, you catch them from spaces, from silences, from the invisible residue that human emotional states leave on environments the way heat leaves fingerprints on surfaces. This was trained in childhood, in environments where the emotional atmosphere was the most important variable in your safety. You learned to scan not just people but rooms, not just faces but spaces, not just voices but silences, because the atmosphere told you what was coming before any human being in the room communicated it. Now you carry this sensitivity everywhere, and the cost is that you're constantly processing emotional data that isn't yours. Other people's tension in your shoulders, other people's grief in your chest, other people's anxiety in your stomach. You absorb atmospheres the way a sponge absorbs water, automatically, completely. And the saturation point comes faster than you'd like. This is why you need alone time that goes beyond introversion. Introverts need solitude to recharge socially. You need solitude to discharge emotionally, to wring out the accumulated atmospheres you've absorbed, to return to your own emotional baseline after hours of carrying everyone else's weather. You're not antisocial, you're oversaturated. And the difference between the two is the difference between someone who doesn't want to be around people and someone who needs to recover from being around people. You're the second one. Every time. Sign 9. You can identify a manipulator in under 5 minutes, not because you're suspicious, because your library is comprehensive. Every manipulative pattern you've encountered, and you've encountered more than most people encounter in a lifetime, is stored in a behavioral database that your brain queries automatically during social interaction. Charm patterns, control patterns, gaslighting indicators, love bombing signatures, triangulation setups, guilt deployment tactics, each one cataloged, each one indexed, each one available for instant cross-reference. When a new person enters your social field, your system runs their behavioral output against the database, not consciously, automatically. And when a match is found, you don't get a thought, you get a feeling. The same feeling you got as a child when you recognized the pattern that preceded something harmful. A gut-level certainty that this person is performing something designed to produce a specific result. 5 minutes. That's usually all it takes. Sometimes less. The manipulator hasn't even finished their introduction, and your system has already completed the scan, identified the pattern match, and generated the assessment. Unsafe. You don't need evidence in the conventional sense. You don't need them to do something obviously manipulative. You need only the pattern signature, the way their charm is slightly too calibrated, the way their interest in you is slightly too focused, the way their questions are slightly too strategic, the way their warmth has a thermostat that adjusts based on your responsiveness. Most people won't see these signals for months. Some never see them. You see them before the appetizers arrive. This speed of identification makes you invaluable as a friend and confusing as a social contact, because you'll sometimes decline to engage with someone that everyone else adores. And you can't explain why without sounding paranoid. I just don't trust them isn't enough, but their charm pattern matches 3 previous manipulators I've encountered, and their behavioral signature indicates calculated interest rather than genuine connection, isn't exactly casual conversation. So you stay quiet, you maintain distance, and when the manipulator eventually reveals themselves, months or years later, nobody remembers that you kept your distance from the beginning. They just remember that you were always a little weird about them. You weren't weird, you were accurate. Your brain just operated on a timeline that nobody else's could match. Sign 10. You navigate conflict with surgical precision. You don't avoid conflict, and you don't escalate it. You navigate it, with a precision that most people find either impressive or unsettling. When a disagreement begins, your brain immediately maps the landscape. What does this person actually want? What are they saying they want? Where's the gap? What emotional need is driving their position? What will de-escalate them? What will escalate them? What's the minimum concession required to resolve this without damage? What's the maximum I can hold without triggering their threshold? All of this is processed in real time, while the conversation is happening, while words are being exchanged. Your conscious mind is participating in the conflict, while your analytical system is running a parallel process that maps the entire dynamic as it unfolds. This skill was built in environments where conflict could escalate dangerously, and the only person managing the escalation was you. A child who had to mediate between volatile adults. A young person who had to de-escalate a parent whose anger had no ceiling. An environment where saying the wrong thing at the wrong moment carried consequences that far exceeded the content of the conversation. You learn to read conflict the way a bomb technician reads a device. Every wire matters. Every connection carries potential. Every choice has an irreversible consequence. And the steadiness of your hands isn't calm, it's trained precision operating under extreme internal pressure. People marvel at how you keep your cool in arguments. They don't see the processing happening underneath the cool. They don't see the 17 calculations you ran before choosing your response. They don't see the 3 responses you discarded because your system identified them as escalation triggers. They just see the finished product. A calm, measured, precisely worded response that lands exactly where it needs to. You're not naturally diplomatic. You're traumatically diplomatic. And the difference between the two is the difference between someone who learned conflict resolution in a workshop and someone who learned it because getting it wrong meant things got dangerous. Sign 11. You can function in crisis, while everyone else freezes. The room is falling apart. Something unexpected has happened, something destabilizing. The normal people are panicking, processing, trying to figure out what to do, and you're already doing it. Not because you're braver, not because you're calmer, because your brain has a crisis gear that most people's brains never develop. A specific neurological state where your processing speed increases, your emotional response decreases, and your executive function sharpens to a point that would be unsustainable under normal conditions, but is precisely calibrated for emergency operation. You don't freeze because freezing wasn't an option during your formative experiences. You don't panic because panic was a luxury your environment didn't permit. You don't wait for instructions because instructions never came. You were the instruction. The only person in the room who was going to solve the problem was you, at age 8, at age 12, at age 15, and now at 35. Crisis activates you the way sunlight activates a solar panel. The energy that's usually dispersed across multiple cognitive functions concentrates into a single beam of focused execution. You assess, you prioritize, you act, while everyone else is still asking what happened. People are amazed by your crisis performance. How are you so calm, they ask. And you want to tell them the truth, but the truth doesn't have a simple version. The simple version sounds like bragging. The real version requires explaining that your calm isn't calm at all. It's a survival state. A neurological mode that your brain enters when it detects the kind of chaos it was specifically trained to navigate. After the crisis passes, the crash comes. Not during, after. When the emergency mode deactivates, everything it suppressed floods in. The fear you didn't feel. The anxiety you couldn't afford. The magnitude of what just happened, it all arrives at once. And the person who was the steadiest in the room 30 minutes ago is now sitting alone processing a delayed emotional response that nobody sees because the crisis is over and everyone assumes you're fine. You're not fine. You're recovering from a neurological state that was necessary but expensive, and the recovery happens in private, always in private, because the person who holds it together during the crisis isn't allowed to fall apart after. That's the unwritten rule your brain has been following since childhood. The intelligence nobody measures 11 signs, 11 cognitive abilities that no standardized test assesses, no school curriculum teaches, no hiring process screens for, and no psychological framework adequately captures: room scanning, energy detection, performance spotting, silence reading, relational prediction, motivation decoding, departure detection, atmospheric absorption, manipulator identification, surgical conflict navigation, crisis functionality. Each one represents a neural pathway that was built under pressure no child should face. Each one represents a cognitive upgrade that was purchased with experiences that most people's nervous systems never had to process. Each one represents an intelligence that the world doesn't recognize because the world measures intelligence with tests designed in safe rooms by people who never needed to read one. Traumatic intelligence isn't on the spectrum of standard intelligence. It's a parallel system, one that operates alongside whatever IQ score you might carry, one that runs in the background of every interaction, every environment, every relationship, scanning, processing, protecting. You didn't ask for this intelligence. You would probably trade it for a quieter brain, for the ability to walk into a room and just see a room, for the ability to meet someone and just meet them without the automatic 16-point assessment, for the ability to sit in silence without reading the silence, for the ability to be in crisis without becoming the solution. But the intelligence isn't going anywhere. It's wired into your nervous system at a level that can't be uninstalled. The pathways are permanent. The library is permanent. The scanning is permanent. What isn't permanent is the assumption that powers it, the assumption that danger is everywhere, that people are threats until proven otherwise, that every room requires assessment because every room might contain what the rooms of your childhood contained. That assumption can be updated. Not the intelligence, the fear underneath it. The intelligence stays. It's genuinely useful. It protects you. It protects the people around you. It makes you perceptive, capable, and profoundly difficult to deceive. But it doesn't have to run on fear anymore. It can run on awareness instead. And the difference between fear-driven perception and awareness-driven perception is the difference between surviving your life and actually living it. The exit. If you counted yourself in 7 or more of these signs, you carry traumatic intelligence. And you need to hear 2 things. First, you're not paranoid. You're not too much. You're not overthinking everything. You're running a cognitive system that was forced to develop under conditions that demanded extraordinary perception just to stay safe. The intelligence is real. The perceptions are accurate. The abilities are genuine. You're not imagining your own capabilities. You're living inside them. Second, the intelligence was built on pain, and honoring the intelligence doesn't require honoring the pain. You can keep the perceptiveness without keeping the hypervigilance. You can keep the pattern recognition without keeping the expectation that every pattern leads to danger. You can keep the ability to read rooms without needing every room to be a threat assessment exercise. The rarest form of smart isn't the kind that solves equations. It's the kind that reads humans, that navigates invisible dynamics, that detects what's hidden, that predicts what's coming, that functions when everything else collapses. You have that intelligence. You paid for it in full, and the receipt is every experience that forced your brain to become what it became. You didn't choose this mind, but you can choose what you do with it. And what you do with it, from this point forward, doesn't have to be survival. It can be life. One last thing, you just counted. I know you did. So tell me 2 things. How many of the 11? And which one has been operating the longest without you having a name for it? Drop both in the comments. The number and the sign. Because the moment you name the intelligence, it stops being a mysterious burden and starts being a recognized capability. And recognized capabilities can be directed instead of just endured.